At my own baby shower, my mother stood up and announced that the apartment, the one I'd paid the deposit on, was actually going to my brother and his girlfriend. Everyone clapped. "You're younger, you'll figure it out," she said, cutting the cake. My sister whispered, "Don't make a scene." I didn't. I simply opened my laptop right there at the table and showed my mother one document she'd forgotten existed. My name's Nate Holloway. I'm 32 years old. I'm a supply chain manager for a regional medical distributor, and I need to tell you about the afternoon my mother stood up at my own baby shower, cut into a vanilla cake with a plastic gold knife, and announced that the apartment I had paid the deposit on was actually going to Caden and Marla because I had, in her words, shown I wasn't ready for the responsibility of family, which was a polished way of saying I refused to name my unborn son after my father because she had decided that was not a request, it was an order. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me give you the context first. I grew up in a quiet stretch of Dayton, Ohio, where the houses were close enough for neighbors to know when you repainted your shutters and far enough apart for people to pretend they minded their own business. We had split-level homes, chain-link fences, basketball hoops with cracked backboards, and fathers who treated lawn care like a moral discipline. My father, Frank, believed in order, obedience, and doing things the way they had always been done. My mother, Diane, believed in appearances. She kept decorative towels nobody could touch, and candles nobody was allowed to burn, as if a magazine editor might storm the house and issue notes. I was the oldest. Then came my sister, Paige, who was 2 years younger and knew how to make adults feel chosen. Then, 6 years after me, came my brother, Caden, who somehow managed from childhood onward to be a problem everyone found adorable. Paige was the polished one. Caden was the charming disaster. I was the reliable utility vehicle in human form. Unequal treatment in families like mine never came as one huge, unforgettable act. It came as 100 small transactions. For my 13th birthday, my parents took Paige and me out because her choir solo had happened that week, and Mom said it made sense to celebrate both. The waiter brought one dessert with 2 spoons. Mine got the candle. Hers got the speech. When Paige turned 16, they rented tables for the backyard, strung lanterns through the trees, and hired a photographer from church. When I turned 16, Dad handed me the keys to his old Taurus and said transmission slips if you push it. When I made honor roll all 4 quarters, Mom said, "That's nice, honey," while helping Paige rehearse. When Paige got waitlisted at a private college she barely researched, the whole house mourned the tragedy of an underappreciated star. When I got into Ohio State with a merit scholarship, Dad said, "Good. Less debt." When Caden got suspended for skipping school and driving to Indianapolis with friends for a sneaker release, Mom cried about how boys need grace. I missed one Thanksgiving in college because I was working an inventory shift, and she told me family should still come first. None of it sounded dramatic by itself. That was the genius of it. I was never the child they worried about because I was the child who could take the smaller room, the shorter celebration, the practical gift, the delayed thanks. At a certain point, mature just meant nobody planned to account for my disappointment. After college, I built a life so practical it almost looked accidental. I started in logistics coordination and worked my way up to supply chain manager for a regional medical distributor outside Columbus. I make sure hospitals and clinics get what they need when they need it, and I fix problems before someone with better hair and worse instincts turns them into an emergency. I liked the work because it rewarded the exact qualities my family consumed without noticing: steadiness, timing, follow-through, the ability to solve a mess quietly. By 30, I was doing well enough to buy a condo apartment with my wife Hazel. 2 bedrooms, top floor, brick building in Worthington, nothing flashy. But the kitchen got this sharp rectangle of morning light every day around 7:15, and for some reason, that felt like a promise. Hazel is a pediatric physical therapist. She spends all day coaxing courage out of tiny humans, and then comes home and asks if we have lemons because dinner suddenly needs acid. We also had a beagle mix named Roosevelt, who snored like a retired mechanic and once stole an entire chicken breast off the counter. Then looked betrayed that we considered this theft. Even after moving out, I still performed family membership like a scheduled duty. I called first. I drove down for Sunday dinners. I helped Dad replace a water heater, assembled furniture for Paige, picked Caden up when he forgot his wallet, brought groceries when Mom was sick, and remained available for anything requiring competence without glory. The people who actually showed up for me lived outside the bloodline. My best friend Declan Morris wore cowboy boots with office slacks like he was trying to broker peace between regions. My boss, Greer Halston, had silver hair she cut herself and a way of tapping her legal pad 3 times when she wanted a room to stop lying. Mrs. Bell, our downstairs neighbor, left lasagna at the door every December because winter makes people forget to eat. The pattern crystallized for me 2 years before the baby shower, at Dad's 60th birthday dinner. Not because it was the worst thing, because it was so clean. Hazel and I brought a gift I had spent a month putting together, a leather-bound photo album of my father's life, carefully restored pictures, captions, real attention. Caden arrived 40 minutes late, carrying a new golf club case he had clearly purchased on the way. Dad lit up like someone had connected him to power. "Now this is useful," he said. My album sat by his chair until after dessert. He opened it eventually, flipped through, nodded once, and said, "Nice." Then he set it aside so the waiter could clear the table. Halfway through pie, Dad started talking about legacy and family names. He looked at Caden while he said most of it. Then he glanced at me and added, "Of course, Nate's always done things his own way." The table chuckled. I stared at a dish of whipped cream going glossy at the edges and thought, with sudden clarity, "Oh, I'm not difficult because I've done anything wrong. I'm difficult because I did not remain available for authorship." I told myself it was fine. I was wrong. When Hazel got pregnant, everyone treated it like a public event. Mom cried. Dad hugged me. Paige immediately started planning a shower. At 22 weeks, we found out we were having a boy. That's when my father's name stopped being his and became, in my parents' minds, a family requirement. Frank. Let me be clear about something. I had nothing against my father's name. Frank is a solid name. It sounds like it owns a hardware store and files taxes in February. The issue was the demand beneath it, the assumption that our child belonged partly to the family system before he had even been born. Hazel and I had already chosen a name, Owen. The first time I said that out loud, Mom smiled the way people smile when a child announces he plans to become a pirate. "You can always use Owen as a middle," she said. Dad added, "First sons carry something." Paige sent texts like, "Not interfering, but Owen Frank sounds strong." Hazel, who is gentle right up until she reaches the wall, put down her fork one night and said, "He's a baby, not a treaty." Things got stranger from there. Hazel and I had been looking to move before the baby arrived. We found a larger condo unit, 3 bedrooms, modest building, good light, close to her clinic and my office. We saved for it ourselves. Real sacrifices. Older cars, fewer trips, a couch that should have retired with honors but remained employed because upholstery is not cheap. Our offer was accepted. We wired the earnest money. We paid the deposit from our own account. Mom inserted herself because she knew the seller's cousin from church and decided this made her a stakeholder. She came to one walkthrough, criticized the cabinet pulls, referred to the guest room as the nursery, and then transferred $2,000 because she wanted to contribute something meaningful. The lender required a gift letter. She signed one, notarized, very clear. Unconditional gift, no ownership interest, no repayment, no decision-making authority. A week later, she called and said very casually, "Your father and I have been discussing whether this home should really go to the child who respects the family." I laughed because I thought she was being dramatic in the harmless way. She was not. Apparently, refusing to name my son Frank meant I was still in a rebellious season. I was 32, married, steadily employed, in escrow on a 3-bedroom condo, and being described like a youth pastor's concern. Mom said in an absolutely level voice, "A home should go to the child who values family continuity." That child, in her view, was Caden. Caden, who was living with his girlfriend, Marla, in a rented townhouse with overdue utility notices and a kitchen drawer full of unopened mail. Caden, who had once used a tax refund to buy a massage chair instead of pay his credit card because, and I quote, "stress is also debt." Hazel stared at me while Mom talked on speaker and mouthed, "Is she hearing herself?" "No," I mouthed back. "That would require reflection. We did not change the name." And somewhere in my mother's mind, that hardened into a moral conclusion. If I would not submit on the grandson, then maybe I had not earned the house. The baby shower was Saturday, May 18th, 2024, at 1 p.m. in the private event room of a cafe in Dublin called Marigold and Pine. Hazel had wanted something small. Mom and Paige turned it into a styled production with muted blue balloons, little wooden baby blocks, custom sugar cookies, and a cake with sugared rosemary sprigs, as if our son were about to emerge from a Tuscan herb garden. Hazel was 33 weeks pregnant and tired in that beautiful, brave way women get when everyone around them is treating their body like public property. She wore a soft green dress and low heels. I wore a navy button-down and carried gift bags from the car. Declan came because he knows my family well enough to recognize a weather pattern. Dad sat near the front looking pleased with himself. Caden and Marla sat by the window. Paige floated. At 1:47 p.m., after the games but before dessert, Mom stood up and tapped her glass with a spoon. "Before we cut this beautiful cake," she said, smiling the smile people use before unveiling either a scholarship or a hostage note, "I wanted to share a family update." She spoke first about blessings and new life and family. Then she put one hand on the cake knife and said, "As many of you know, Nate and Hazel have been looking at a larger apartment for the baby, but after a lot of reflection, Frank and I realized that place is actually going to Caden and Marla to help them get started." There was a tiny pause while the room decided what reality it had been handed. Then she added lightly, "Nate's always been the one who figures things out. He'll manage, but a home should go to the child who respects family. And since they've made certain choices about tradition, we felt this was the right direction." A few people actually clapped. Paige leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't make a scene." That sentence is almost never directed at the person who caused the harm. It is directed at the person expected to absorb it neatly. Hazel went still beside me. Dad lifted his iced tea. Caden stared at the table. Marla looked like she had just realized she was attending a crime. Mom kept talking. "Some children understand that family means honoring what came before them." She was talking about my son's name at my own baby shower, while holding a cake knife. I remember stupidly precise details from that moment. The smell of coffee and vanilla icing, the lipstick mark on Hazel's water glass, the little blue paper elephants on the favor bags, the way my pulse didn't speed up. It slowed down. I did not stand. I did not shout. I reached under the table, pulled up my laptop bag, set it beside my plate, unzipped it, and opened my computer. Mom frowned as if I were the one violating etiquette. I logged into the property folder, opened the gift letter, and turned the screen toward her. "Mom," I said, in the same voice I use when a vendor tells me a payment was never received, and I already have the wire confirmation. "That apartment is not going to Caden and Marla." She laughed lightly. "Nate, not now." "No," I said, "now is perfect." On the screen was the gift letter she had signed 6 weeks earlier, her name. Notary seal, clear language, unconditional gift, no claim, no occupancy rights, no ownership interest, no authority over the property. "You forgot this existed," I said. No one spoke. Then I opened the wire receipt showing the deposit had come from Hazel's in my account. Then the purchase agreement listing us as the sole buyers. Then the lender correspondence. Nothing dramatic. Just a stack of clean, boring, lethal facts. Dad leaned forward. "What is all this?" "This," I said, "is the documentation showing Hazel and I bought that condo with our money in our names. The $2,000 Mom contributed was legally documented as a gift, which was appreciated at the time and is now apparently being rebranded into attempted property redistribution." Someone near the back snorted. It was Declan. Bless him forever. Mom's face changed in stages. First indignation, then disbelief, then the realization the paper does not care who planned the centerpiece. "You knew what I meant," she snapped. "Yes." I said, "That's why I brought the file." Hazel very softly said, "At our baby shower." That landed harder than anything else in the room. Mom set down the cake knife. "This is humiliating." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because a woman had publicly reassigned her son's home over a baby naming dispute and was now objecting to the administrative follow-up. Dad said, "We can discuss this privately." "We already did," I said. "Privately, you told me a home should go to the child who respects family tradition." Caden finally looked up and said, "I didn't ask for this." "That," I said, "is the smartest thing anyone said today." We left 10 minutes later. Hazel thanked the two people who handed her gifts. Declan carried them to the car. In the parking lot, Hazel sat in the passenger seat, both hands on her stomach, staring through the windshield. Then she cried. Not loud, not theatrical, just quiet, exhausted tears from someone who had finally run out of excuses for other people. The added layer came that night. At 8:12 p.m., Paige posted shower photos online. Balloon arch, cake table, Hazel smiling. Then, fourth in the carousel, a candid shot of Mom with her hand on Caden's shoulder, Marla leaning in, all three of them grinning under the Welcome Baby Holloway sign. The caption said, "Family makes room for the ones who honor it." There it was, the actual theology. Housing as reward, access as obedience, love as a compliance system. Then Marla called. She told me Mom had been telling them for weeks that Hazel and I were rethinking the condo because of ongoing tension with Dad over the baby's name. The private version was worse. If I changed the baby's name to Frank, the housing issue would resolve itself. There it was. Flat. Complete. The home I paid for had become leverage in a naming dispute. After Owen was born in July, healthy, serious, and already capable of looking mildly disappointed in adults, I withdrew. Not theatrically. I simply stopped doing the work. I stopped calling first. Stopped reminding Dad about online bill pay. Stopped bringing groceries, fixing Wi-Fi, coordinating birthdays, answering quick questions that were actually unpaid labor. I sent one birth announcement photo, full name included, Owen, not Frank. Then I waited. 36 days passed before anyone noticed enough to say anything. On day 37, Mom texted, "Are you still free next weekend to help your father move patio furniture before the storms?" There it was. Need, not relationship. Labor request? I wrote back, "No." She replied, "That's all?" "Yes," I thought. Sometimes a complete answer is only 2 letters long. The surprising part was what happened when I stopped funneling all my energy into a family system that treated competence as a public utility. I had energy left. At work, I got sharper. Greer pulled me into her office in September after I led a vendor restructuring that cut delayed fulfillment by 18% in 1 quarter. Her office smelled faintly like black coffee and printer toner, and she kept an ugly ceramic owl on her desk that I suspect had sentimental immunity. She said, "Do you know what your problem used to be? I'm sure this will be encouraging. You treated competence like something to hide so other people wouldn't feel threatened by it." Then she slid a promotion packet across the desk. "Senior Regional Operations Lead. You don't need smaller rooms," she said. "You need rooms where accuracy isn't interpreted as attitude." Therapy helped too. Hazel suggested it gently, in the tone of someone saying, "Perhaps we address this before you turn into an efficient emotional bunker." So I started seeing Dr. Tatum on Wednesday evenings. She wore tortoiseshell glasses and cardigans in colors I can only describe as library weather. In our 4th session, after I spent 15 minutes describing my family like a damaged workflow, she said, "You have confused compliance with connection." I sat there. She went on, "You were trained to believe that if you were useful enough, available enough, agreeable enough, you would eventually feel chosen. But usefulness is not intimacy. It's a role." That was the beam under the whole house. I wasn't grieving one bad event. I was finally naming the arrangement. While all that was happening, our real life deepened. Declan brought takeout and held Owen like a bomb technician until he got confident enough to whisper football commentary to him. Mrs. Bell left soup by the door with notes that said things like, "Protein matters." Hazel's coworker Marin brought freezer burritos labeled by filling. And Hazel, who never needed speeches, kept showing up in verbs. She handed me water during late-night feedings. She paid the electric bill, kissed my forehead, and one Tuesday night, after a rough therapy session, I came home to find the dining table cleared, my laptop open, and Hazel highlighting our budget. "I thought," she said, "we could finally plan the nursery shelves without leaving room for emergency family nonsense." That was romance. Structural peace. By November, I felt solid for the first time in my life. Not healed. Not untouched. Just less porous. Which is exactly when the family reached back in. It was Dad. Owen had finally fallen asleep on my chest after objecting to bedtime on constitutional grounds. Dad used that softer tone people use when they want a favor without discussing history. "Your mother and I are in a bit of a situation," he said. Of course they were. Caden and Marla had broken up. He had nowhere stable to go. Since Hazel and I had the extra bedroom, maybe Caden could stay for a month or two while he got back on his feet. I said, "You mean in the home Mom said should go to him because he honored family?" Dad exhaled. "Do we really need to do all this? Men like my father ask that when facts begin generating consequences." "Yes," I said, "we do." We met Thursday evening at an Italian restaurant in Hilliard with fake vines, laminated menus, and breadsticks aggressive enough to count as infrastructure. Hazel stayed home with Owen. "Go," she said. "Just don't carry any emotional furniture back with you." Dad came first. Mom came second. Paige joined. Caden arrived last, tired and older in a way I had not seen before. I brought a folder. Mom began with injury. "You have no idea how humiliating that day was for me." I set the first page on the table. Screenshot of Paige's post. "Family makes room for the ones who honor it." "That's why I brought exhibits," I said. Then I laid out the rest: the notarized gift letter, the deposit wire confirmation, the purchase agreement, the text messages about naming the baby Frank. Dad's message: "First sons carry something. Think carefully before setting a tone you can't undo." On April 4th, I said, "Mom signed a document acknowledging she had no ownership interest in our condo." On April 11th, she started suggesting it might go to Caden instead. On May 18th, she announced that publicly at our baby shower. That same night, Marla told me the private issue behind all of it was the baby's name. If any part of that timeline is inaccurate, say so. Nobody did. Caden rubbed his eyes. "I should have said something." "Yes," I said. "You should have." Mom sat straighter. "You keep saying your home, like family has no claim on what you build." I looked at her and said, "Exactly." She blinked. "That is the problem. You raised me to believe anything stable I created remained available for redistribution if you were disappointed in me. My time, my labor, my money, my home, even my son's name." Dad looked away. Paige started crying quietly. Then Caden surprised me. "You told us Nate changed his mind," he said to Mom. "Then at the shower, you made it about respect and tradition." I didn't stop it because I thought maybe for once something easy would land in my lap. But it was messed up. Mom turned toward him like betrayal had just been invented. Dad said weakly, "Your mother wanted continuity." I said, "You tried to tie a housing dispute to a naming requirement." Even he had no response to that sentence. Finally, Mom said the truest thing she managed all night. "I wanted one thing done the right way, not the fair way, her way." I said, "The answer is no. Caden is not moving into our home. Not temporarily. Not because this is punishment, but because access to my family now depends on whether you can behave like we are separate adults and not pieces inside your system." That shut the table down. It was too specific to dismiss and not emotional enough to caricature. Paige apologized, a real apology for once. Dad said, "I should have stopped your mother." Not enough, but more than usual. Mom stayed mostly silent after that. A wall in tasteful jewelry. Aftermath was uneven, which made it true. Nobody transformed in the parking lot. We paid our separate checks. Paige came around first. Slowly, through actions. She dropped off children's books on our porch with a note that said, "No expectation. Just trying to do one thing without attaching myself to it." Later, she came over, washed bottles at our sink without announcing it, and left before bedtime because she understood new parents measure kindness partly by how little cleanup it creates. Dad became careful. He calls now. Briefly, sometimes about football, sometimes about tools. He has met Owen 3 times. He calls him Owen every time. There are men who apologize by pronouncing the right name. It is not enough. It is also not nothing. Mom remained a wall. A decorated wall, certainly, but a wall. She sends gifts through Paige. She signs cards. She has never once directly acknowledged the speech at the shower. I no longer wait for that. Caden found a roommate, kept a job longer than 6 months, and sent me one text in February that I saved because it was the first fully adult thing he had ever written me. "I've been thinking about how often I benefited from you being the one who figured things out. I don't know what to do with that yet, but I know it's true. The small, beautiful moment that stays with me happened on a cold Saturday in March. Hazel was in the kitchen making pancakes shaped vaguely like circles, and one unmistakably like Texas. Owen was in his high chair banging a spoon with the moral certainty of a tiny union organizer. Roosevelt waited underneath for falling food like a furry sanitation department. Morning light stretched across the floor in those clean rectangles I loved from the first condo. Declan had dropped off coffee and let himself out quietly when he saw we were still in pajamas. Hazel slid a plate toward me and said, "You know the nice thing about this house?" "What?" "No one here thinks love is a vote." That was it. Small enough to be real, large enough to reorganize a life. My name's Nate Holloway. I'm 32 years old, I manage supply chains for a living, and for most of my life I thought being dependable meant staying available for other people's definitions of me. It doesn't. It just means you become easy to reach. The difference took me too long to learn. I still believe in family, just not as a system where obedience earns shelter and silence counts as virtue. I believe in the people who show up with lasagna, legal pads, freezer burritos, and the right sentence at the right time. I believe in the wife who put a hand between my shoulder blades and trusted me to tell the truth in a room that wanted me polite more than honest. I believe in calling a child by the name his parents chose. I believe in homes that belong to the people who build them. And if you're wondering, yes, our son's name is Owen. He lives in the apartment we bought, under a roof no one gets to reassign because they dislike our choices. He smiles in his sleep sometimes, like he already knows something private and wonderful. Maybe it's this. I'm still Nate, still steady, still the one who figures things out. The difference now is that I do it for the life I built, not for the people who confused my usefulness with their ownership.